Welcome to the Phi Masterclass here at the Fabled Academy. Today we are taking a look at the decklist for Phi in the Living Legend format with Sebastian Grondal. If you are new to Phi, check out our basics video we recorded already on how to play Phi when you're starting out. Sebastian, welcome to the Academy.
Thank you once again. It's very nice to be here.
Yeah, it's amazing to have you on to talk about the Living Legend format in Phi because you're one of the players that really shaped Phi with Stubby Hammerus.
Yep, that was some summer, that's for sure.
Yeah, Europe was on fire and you won the European Champions Battle with Full Force Phi.
Yeah, that for sure that was what it was, Full Force Phi. That was some powerful list that we came up with back then, and I wasn't the only one. Sanders, he was on Phi as well, won the calling. And yeah, some players identified Phi as a good deck back then, and I believe that he will at least be a contender in the Living Legend format. Maybe not the best deck, but he will be there.
So before we jump into the deck profile, what's your opinion on the Living Legend format and Phi's position in it? Why do you like to choose Phi for the Living Legend format?
First off, I think the Living Legend format is a cool move. We were expecting it to happen for a while, and now it's actually happening. And it's debuting at the World Championships, Battle Hardened, and hey, we'll see. Depending on how well Worlds go for me, I might be playing in it, who knows? I'll definitely bring a deck. I'm very excited about it. And Phi, what makes Phi so powerful for the LL format? He gets back one of his favorite equipment pieces, the Stubby Hammers. The hammers that deal 7 damage when you crack them, or rather the arm guards, it's not a hammer. The arm guards that deal like 7 damage when you crack them on a single turn. It's absolutely insane. Works so well with Phi. And yeah, he played them back in July last year. They got banned pretty much immediately when I said they were completely broken on video. And yeah, now he has them back in the LL format, and we'll see if that is enough to make him stand up to the other tall giants like Chain and Viserai with Skeleda and Starvo and Prism. Prism for sure. Prism is easy matchup, but I don't know about the others. We'll see.
So to all the viewers who don't know yet about the Living Legend format, check out the video on the channel covering the basics on the format. Sebastian, let's jump into the deck profile now. We already did a video on covering the basics to play with Phi, but once again here, what are the key cards in the Living Legend format to look out when playing Phi?
I made it very easy here. So I sorted the deck into the main equipment pieces at the top here. Then we have the deck of 54 cards, which I think are like the 54 most important cards that you will generally play in the deck. And then after that, I have a sideboard of just, I threw a bunch of cards in that are cards that you might want to consider. And then we can talk about why you might consider each of these cards as the last couple slots in the deck. But for the most important parts, the key pieces. So you can see at the top, at the equipments, that we have the Majestic and Common equipments, not very expensive. Surprisingly, common pieces are just the best apparently. We have the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, the piece that lets you search for a 2 or less base attack when you hit by destroying the mask. And this is really good in Phi because of Lava Burst and Salt the Wound, which have a base of 2, but they get significantly more attack, despite having a base of 2. So that would be, yes, Salt the Wound. Gets +1 for each attack that has hit this turn. Very good when you throw out like 6 or 7, 8 attacks in a turn. And then Lava Burst just gets +3 as long as it's Chain Link 4 or higher. So you can see already that the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, when you hit, find something that deals 5 damage at least with the Lava Burst. But you will see how that is generally not just 5 damage in a short while. Because the next equipment, the broken one, or the other broken one, Stubby Hammers, the arms pieces that you can use an action to sacrifice or destroy, and then attack actions you control with 3 or less base gain +1 while attacking this turn. This already shows that what you're trying to do with this deck is you're trying to set up a turn where you can Stubby Hammers and Mask of the Pouncing Lynx on the same turn. And then already you can see that the Mask of the Pouncing Lynx card already, for example the Lava Burst, has an additional +1 from the Stubbies. So they're synergizing well together. And then The two last equipment pieces are Snapdragon Scalers. A classic can make sure that you can play all your cards on a turn where you're going off by giving go again to something that doesn't usually have go again, like a Lava Burst or Assault to Wound, so you can play two of those on the same turn. And then the last equipment piece, Blossom of Spring. And this is quite an unusual piece because it rose, burned, and fell to the ground very fast because it was used for that one tournament, this one specific deck last year, and then it wasn't good anymore. And the reason why Blossom Spring was a good card in this deck over the Tunic is because sometimes your hand would line up just so perfectly on your turn 2 that turn 2 would be the turn that you would go off. And if you didn't have the Tunic counter on turn 2, for example, which you would only have that by turn 3, if you didn't have that one resource, then your whole turn would be messed up and you would deal significantly less damage. Blossom of Spring is essentially a Tunic that you can use on turn 2 and you don't care about the block, which is what makes it important in the deck. And then down in the list we have what is essentially a very, I would say, basic file list, except a few things change. We have the Belittle, which was banned about half a year ago in CC. Not justified. I think Belittle should be unbanned again. I don't think it's too good, but I'm not the balance team at LSS, of course. But it's a very good card. It's very good at fixing your hands. So what this card allows you to do is run less blues in the deck, because you have a red card that can essentially fix for blue. Very good. Also, this synergizes very well with the Blossom Spring you saw earlier, where you can sacrifice that, gain the resource, and then play this, find the blue, and then all of a sudden you have three resources in a hand where you would have originally had 0 resources, or 1 resource from a red. It's very good in that sense. And then after that, we have a bunch of basic cards. We have the 0 for 3 and 0 for 4 go again cards, the Blaze Headlong, Brand, Ronin Renegades, and Rising Resentments, and all that stuff. Then what makes this list a little more different than the normal CC list are that we definitely want to run the 3 Spreading Flames. They are very important in the list due to their powerful nature when you make really long combat chains. So they function sort of like an Art of War light in this deck. And then we have the Lava Vein Loyalty Reds. And those are also not cards that are always run in the CC list nowadays, because they don't have go again by themselves. But in this deck, they will have go again on the important turns always. Because the OTK turn is what matters, and then before that, they block 3. And blocking is more important than you would think in this deck. And then the last thing to note about this mainboard part of the deck is 3 Flamecall Awakening and 1 Phoenix Flame extra, besides the one you start with. And in general, when playing Fi, I have not been a fan of running more than 1 Phoenix Flame, because it's a very bad draw. I was always advocating not running more than 1. Yeah. But in this ODK version, and also when I played it last year, I did opt to run 3 Flamecall Awakening and 1 Phoenix Flame, because the Flamecall Awakening is just such a good high roll card with the Stubby Hammers and the Spreading Flames. It's just insane how much extra damage you get from that, because the Stubby Hammers will add damage both to the Flame Call and the Phoenix Flame that you find off the Flame Call. So it's very good synergy, and that makes it worth having 1 bad draw in your deck to run the 3 Flamecall Awakening. Just because playing one of these at the right time will grant you a lot of extra damage. And I think that's the most important parts about the main deck. The rest of this is very like the CC deck, except maybe there is something else to touch on. The blues are a little different. The blues also are parts of the deck that you could change out. Generally in CC you would run something like Blue Snatch and Blue Soulbeat Strike. But the reason why the blues are different here is because I want the blues to be something that you could draw on a combo turn and still have them be good. You can't draw too many non-go-again cards on a combo turn. And these blue cards still work very well with something like Spreading Flames, and they can actually be sort of upgraded by Spreading Flames even if you're drawing them on a combo turn. They can be turned essentially into yellow cards by the Spreading Flames. they work on combo turn, and that's the important part. And then you have 2 of them that block 3, so they can help you survive. Yeah, that's basically the core piece of the deck. As I mentioned in the Basics Fi video, now that we're going down to the sideboard, is that Fi is a deck that has like 50, 51, 54 really good cards, slot very well into the deck. Then he has like the last 9-6 pieces, and you don't really know what to play with that, because there is nothing that's obvious. And then I just put a bunch of cards in the sideboard that are things that we could consider running in the last 6 pieces of the deck up there. And for the equipment, we have the Flame Scale, we have Tiger Stripe, Tide Flippers, and Tunic. And the reason why we have something like Furnace and Tiger Stripe is because some matchups you might want to consider playing a style where you're better at blocking. This could be into something like Starvo, where there are all the crush effects and on-hit effects that, if chained properly, could disable you completely. So those are an option. You might want to have a configuration in your sideboard that allows you to side into something that blocks better, and then have less of a combo turn. I'm not sure which of them will be correct yet. It could also be correct just to pray to the gods and then hope that he misses on one turn, then go off on that turn. Might be correct, but both of those will have to be tested out. And then there's the Tide Flippers for arcane damage. And the good thing about Tide Flippers is that it still gives Go Again to the most important attacks you have that want Go Again in the deck, and that is the Lava Burst and the Salted Wound on a combo turn. This card you bring in when you play against anything dealing arcane. You're playing against Viserai, Chain, something like that. You can bring in the Tide Flippers because it allows you to stall longer to get the combo turn up. And really what you want to do is you want to stall until you have that 40 damage turn. And then besides it, you have the Tunic. And the Tunic would be relevant into something like Ultim or Icelander. The Tunic would be good. The Fi list, like this, with Belittle and Tunic, I think is very favored into Icelander if you play it correctly. Because I remember in the Basics version, I talked briefly about the story of testing for Worlds last year with a couple of other players from Finland, and they told me that they had never had such difficulty into Fi on Icelander. And it's simply a thing that depends on playstyle and how your experience with the deck. And to have this win percentage, Tunic is important, and Belittles are important. And if you play those correctly, then you can have a good matchup into Icelander. That depends to see on how relevant Icelander will be in the LL format, but it's at least worth considering that Tunic could be a card you want to run. Yeah, and then after that, we have a bunch of cards for the deck, the last 6 cards you want to add. Last year, at the tournament, I played the Rising Resentment yellow. I just concluded that I needed more 0-4 some damage Go Again cards. And there weren't any more 0-for-3s, so I had to add a 0-4 too. And it turned out that this card was fine. It ticked boxes, because it's fine with the Spreading Flames, because it will just be upgraded to a red generally, if you play it on the correct timing with the Spreading Flames. And it's a card that you can start chains with, and you can throw it off Art of War on a combo turn, and it still works fine. So it ticked boxes, even though it's slightly below raid. It still did fine. So I think this is an option. I don't know if it's quite good enough, but I don't know if you have better options is the thing. The thing about running this though is that if you have the right mass of Draconic cards, you can run more high roll cards, like the Tome of Firebrand. And the thing about Tome of Firebrand is it's been completely forgotten since last year, because it's very difficult to reach 4 Draconic Chainlinks without having used your whole hand to do it, basically. But this deck could do it. And that's the thing, if you have a 5-card hand and you line things up properly, you can play the Tome of Firebrand. And if you do that, it is very good. I played 2 in the list last year, and I only played them into high roll matchups. And it did work out fairly well last year. So I would be keen on testing if this works well with playing the correct mass of Draconic attack action cards. Then we have the yellow brands. That was just to show that it's an option instead of the Rising Resentment. the brands are really good with Kodachis, but you're not going to play Kodachis in this deck anyways. So it's not necessarily better than the Rising Resentment. I think I chose the Rising Resentment because it has a slight upside with maybe it hits and maybe you get a discount in your hands.
Yeah.
And then we have 2 extra Belittle and 1 extra Blue Minnowism. And this is something you can consider for Icelander, as I mentioned just before. A really easy way to... You have to play the matchup correctly. But a way to win the matchup is playing 2 or 3 extra Belittles in yellow and then playing extra blues. And then just AB1. And then you should be able to consistently, like 90%, 80% of the time, beat Icelander. Because you have a good matchup into that. And then I'm talking like full power Icelander right now. Like Icelander from when there were no bans on Icelander.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly what could be a matchup in the Living Legend format, facing Icelander at her full power.
Yeah, it could be. So if you have the proper sideboard with Fi, then that is a good matchup for you. Because Belittles are very good into that, and you can present enough damage that you can whittle them down and give them a very hard time. And then lastly in the deck, we have the top row of cards up here. We have the red Soaring Strikes. This is also a starter, a red. And the reason why you might want to run this over the yellows that were below is that this is better rate, right? It's 1 for 4 instead of 0 for 2. But the awkward thing about this is it's 1 resource for 4, and the deck is very, I wouldn't say hungry on resources, but if you draw the incorrect combination of resource costs together, it could mean that you can't play all your cards.
Yeah.
And this is especially important when you're trying to combo off and you're just trying to like play everything out of your hand. Drawing the Soaring Strike might mean that you can't play that card on that turn, and that would mean missing out on, if you had the brand or the yellow Rising Resentment instead, that could be like 4 damage or 5 damage on that turn. Yeah. Also, Soaring Strike, it's 4 base, doesn't get anything from Stubby Hammers, so it doesn't get the buff from that. So you don't get very much out of playing it. I think generally I would probably not play it, but you might want to play 1 or 2. Then we have Rise from the Ashes. I've always hated Rise from the Ashes because I don't like the Phoenix Flame package, as we talked about earlier. And this card doesn't just take a Phoenix Flame up from your yard, right? Because when you're taking a Phoenix Flame up from your yard, the downside from that is if you don't have another Phoenix Flame to grab from your yard later with the Fi, then you're essentially just removing 1 damage from your graveyard by taking that Phoenix Flame up now. Rise from the Ashes is only really good when you have 2 flames in your yard, and when you have that, it is a really good card. But when you don't have 2 flames in your yard, it's a very bad card. This deck is trying to go really fast, and you're generally not going to have the time to set up an extra Phoenix Flame in your graveyard, so I don't think I would play it, but I just wanted to put it in here to talk about it and show that it's an option if you want to, but I don't think it accomplishes the game plan of the deck. Then we have the defensive cards, Sink Below and Reinforce the Line. And as I talked about with the Flamescale Furnace, you might want to consider having the possibility of veering into something more mid-rangey in the sideboard because of decks like Sarvo that present really threatening on-hits that can completely disable you. And Sink Belows and Reinforce the Line can help with that, along with the armor equipment pieces that you can run.
Yeah. And
there aren't really that many matchups you want these in, because generally you just want to stick to a very solid main board game plan of killing them with high rolly stuff, because you're giving up a lot to take in these cards. But some matchups, it can be so difficult to get that on its feet that you need to play defensively. And in that case, you would consider running a Sink Below Reinforce the Line package to defend against those decks. And that would also need testing. I haven't tested this, of course. It's just been announced. It's only my ideas going to go through about this. And then after that, we have Down and Dirty Command and Conquer. Down and Dirty would just be a card that you would play against Illusionist. It's a card that you could consider running like one-off against Illusionist, which you're already good into that matchup, but Down and Dirty alone, like having 1 copy of that card will add like 5% more win percentage or something, because having 1 in the deck means that your opponent has to respect it. And then the Command and Conquer is a card that is both good into Illusionist, but you can also play it into other matchups where if you can just essentially stall them out by threatening with threatening on hits like Command and Conquer and making them block, they won't deal you damage, and then you have more time to set up for a 40 damage turn. It's good against, you could say, perhaps other high rolling matchups, but then again, I'm not sure, because it's the thing about wanting to maximize your own high roll turn or wanting to disrupt their high roll turn, because this card is good at disrupting them, but you also don't want to play this or see this on your high roll turn. So you have to weigh if playing this is worth having less of a good high roll turn on your own. And I would say it is, especially into Fi, because Fi blocks like ass, especially with this equipment setup. He can't block you at all. So he will generally have to throw 3 cards away on this. And that means he's not going off on that turn. So I would play this into something that's port blocking like other Fis, and then use that for getting time to set up for your own high roll turn. And then besides that, we have a Double Strike. And that is also a card I did not run last year. And I think that is mainly because it's not Draconic. And I wanted to run the Tome of Firebrand version. And I think if you run this, it is good with Stubby Hammers, of course, because it gets the +1 from Stubby Hammers 2 times. But then still, that only gets it to a 4 damage card. If you also play an Art of War though, then all of a sudden you're getting a lot of damage from that. It's 6 damage for 1 card. And it starts looking worth it. But once again, you just have to remember that it doesn't synergize with the Spreading Flames, and it doesn't synergize with the Tome of Firebrand. And it's incredibly important to have a density of Draconic cards in your deck that synergize with each other. And it could be worth running Double Strike, but you're giving up value with your Draconic plan. And that's just important to remember, because this card is also very, very garbage on any turn that you're not going off. Because it blocks 2, it attacks for 2. You're not getting any more value than that. So if you're not going off, Double Strike is just it's bad. So you could consider running it for only the combo turn, but then you just have to remember that it's going to be bad all other times that you draw it.
That also leads to the question whether small mistakes are vulnerable in the Living Legend format or not, because we also want to talk about the matchups that you're facing when running Fi in the Living Legend format. Like you already mentioned, the biggest powerhouses in the game are coming back in this format, like Bravo Star of the Show. And if you're missing your most important damage turn on a Double Strike, that could really lose you the game when facing off Bravo Star of the Show, for example.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, Double Strike is only good when you're doing the complete combo with the Art of War and the Stubby Hammers. And it's very bad all the other times. And if you miss your beat, as you put, as you said, you're missing a little bit of damage, or you're being a little bit inconsistent or something like that, missing your window, it could be very damning, because into something like Starbo, he's going to be disrupting you pretty much most turns. And when he doesn't, you need to use that window for smacking back at him with a lot of damage to put him on the rear end. And if you don't seize that window, he's gonna clap back at you after that, and you're gonna have missed it. So you need your cards to be very consistent, and you need them to achieve, let's call it, unified or very specific game plan.
When running Fi at full force, what are the best matchups that you can run into when playing at the World Championship on Sunday in the Battle Hardened?
I think he has similar strengths and weaknesses to his CC version. I don't think that changes very much, because he's very good against decks that don't disrupt you. So if you're playing against Viserai, I think there's a very good chance that you out high roll Viserai. I think, without having tested it, I think, at least from experience, that from last year, that Fi in this iteration is very good at high rolling. As long as your opponent is not representing disruption, it's very good. It's good life. But as soon as your opponent starts representing disruption, it can be tough, because you need to find a window to go off, or you need to play a defensive game plan that is not as good at dealing damage. And either way, you're going to be playing an uphill battle. For example, Starbo, he's good at that. He gets all the good cards from basically Ultim, and then also the good cards from Bravo. And he also has a new card now that can disrupt you from playing any attacks at all. He has all the good attacks basically, and he's going to be throwing those at you, and you're going to have to respect it. So I think I would guess that matchup is not good. Stavo is not good for Bravo. No, for Fi. Sorry. Stavo is not good for Fi. And then Viserai is probably good for Fi. Prison is 100% good for Fi. Very good matchup. I don't think I've ever lost to a Prison with Fi. It's insanely favored for Fi. And then we would have something like Ultim. Ultim is also a good matchup for Fi, because Ultim is presenting less threats than Starvo. And he's trying to block a lot. And Fi is very good at coming or managing to get over blocks. He's good at presenting a lot of consistent damage that can't be blocked out forever. And I've had a lot of Ultims try to fatigue me back in the day when playing Fi, and I've also had Ultims try to race me while playing Fi, and both have failed, essentially. The fatigue always fails, the racing gets closer. It's definitely the right mindset to try to race Fi as Ultim rather than fatigue them, but it still worked out for Fi in my testing and playing in tournaments. Then there is probably Lexi in a short while. Lexi will also be an interesting matchup, but I think that matchup I think will play out differently than in the CC, because Lexi is basically at her peak power right now, right? She has all the cards she wants. She doesn't have the bullseye bracers, but I think Stubby Hammers is more of a power boost than bullseye bracers, if I'm gonna be honest. Yeah. So I think it's gonna play out a little differently, because Lexi has good on hits on her things, but her on hits are not gonna completely disable your turns. So you can still take the damage from her on hits in general, and then slap back. And if you just slap back with 40 damage against Lexi, she doesn't have the equipment to block it, so she's gonna have to start blocking from her hand. And then when she does that, you can just lock her with playing a decent hand every turn. So I think actually Lexi is a manageable matchup for Fi in the Living Legend format. And I think that's like the core of the matchups that are fun to talk about. I think in general, just think of the rest of the matchups as disruptive matchups like Usuri, which will be fairly tough. And then matchups that don't disrupt as much, that are aggro mirrors, which will be in general quite favored for Fi, because he can just do 40 damage turn, and then you're on your back. The opponent is on the back foot for the rest of the game.
Yeah. So one last matchup that I want to hear your thoughts on is the Briar Ball Lightning build with potentially Duskblade in it.
Right. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's right. No, I think... Oh, that's a tough one, because that deck is also very powerful, but I don't think the Duskblade is what makes it powerful, because I don't think there's going to be time for that anyways. But the Ball Lightning is very good, and that could be something, but I still think that the Fi deck is better at high rolling than the Briar deck, if I have to make a prediction right now. The Duskblade doesn't matter. It's not going to assemble enough counters anyways. The game is not going to go that long. It's just going to be over before. But the Ball Lightnings are good. And they can make some very insane arcane damage turns that you can't block with the Ball Lightnings, where the things stack properly, and I don't even want to think about that. But I think Fi on average would be favored into that, because I think it's very like the Viserai deck. I think Viserai is going to get more of a power boost with the Skeleton. I think that equipment is just the most broken equipment ever printed in the game, and Viserai is going to get a spike from it, that's for sure.
Alright, if you have further questions regarding the matchups, or you want to share your own thoughts on the matchups, leave them down in the comments. Coming to the play patterns that we actually want to pull off in the Living Legend format with Fi, what are the key ones and what are the most important parts to think about when pulling those off?
Yeah, the key difference between CC Fi and the Living Legend Fi is that Living Legend Fi is more okay with blocking than CC Fi, because Living Legend Fi has this broken turn to fall back on where he can deal 40 damage, and then at that point he will turn the game. Classic Constructed Fi doesn't have the same output potential that Living Legend Fi has because of the Stubby Hammers, and that 7 damage-ish difference from the Stubby Hammers is actually the important factor in making that difference. For example, into disruptive matchups, I remember very clearly that I played a match last year in the Calling at the last match I played, and I was playing against the Viserai deck that had all the 1 for 4 and 2 for 4 that when you've created Rune Chant or hit with arcane damage, if they hit, their opponent has to discard a card. And I just sat back against the deck and I just blocked all I could. Like, until he had one turn after like 7 turns where he couldn't present a card that would discard a card from my hand, or like a Command and Conquer or something. The one turn he couldn't do that, I just unloaded everything. I just had an Art of War and Arsenal, and then I just kept my whole 4 cards because I didn't have to block anymore, and then smacked everything at his face for like 37 damage or something. And then that was enough to turn the game. And that is the play pattern that is really distinct for Fi and the Living Legend. It is okay to be blocking with Fi and the Living Legend until you have a good turn. And you just have to realize that is the difference between him in the Living Legend and him in the CC. And then it's important to also note when you might not want to go for the complete, head to the wall, complete OTK deck, and play something more mannered and slower against something like Prism, maybe, because Prism is such a favorite matchup that if you play something even just a little bit slower against her, you're probably still gonna win, because her auras don't do anything, and if you have a couple poppers in your deck to catch her off guard at certain times, you can also take her heralds away. So she just doesn't have a very good matchup into you, whatever you do. But yeah, the general game plan, do your normal, just average-ish turns where you just attack with a couple go again cards, the Ember Blades, and then the finishers. Try to make your opponent block. If they don't, and they try to disrupt you, it is fine blocking to protect your key cards. And then once they fail to disrupt you, you go off, put them on their back foot, and then you just keep them on their back foot for the rest of the game after that.
Sebastian, thank you so much for taking the time and diving into the Living Legend format, which so many players are excited to explore and play at the World Championship.
It was super fun. This is also my first look at the Living Legend format and Fi in that format as well, so it's been very fun for me to revisit a deck of the past from last year when Fi started seeing play and constructed. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, it is an exciting time to be a player in Flesh and Blood, and the Living Legend format really excels that excitement, I think, at the World Championship, because like you said, players that don't make it to the last day of the World Championship then actually can enjoy maybe also their favorite heroes at full power in this format.
Yeah, and I mean, it's only top 8 playing on Sundays, so most of us are gonna be available to play at the Living Legend Battle Hardened.
So to all the viewers, thank you so much for sticking on till the end. If you found this video helpful, leave a like, and if you want to contribute anything to the Living Legend format discussion, leave them down in the comments. And subscribe to the channel for future masterclasses and check out the videos that we already have.